Well, hi, Happy New Year. It's 2021, I can't believe it. Hope you had as good a Christmas as you possibly could. My name is Matt and I have the privilege of leading Maybridge Community Church. And as we start the new year, I want to take this time to look at what's actually my favourite Bible story. And if you were around, you may remember I actually spoke about this time last year, which now feels like a very long time ago. But also, I'm convinced that this passage is always very relevant to everyone at any time, and maybe especially right now. Plus, if you're checking us out as a church, you've seen some of the stuff that we've been up to recently and you want to know what it's all about, this is at the heart of what we want you to hear about the Christian message. Okay? It's a story Jesus tells. It's in the Gospel of Luke chapter 15, and it may surprise you to learn Jesus is speaking to a group of very self-righteous, very religious leaders, and he's questioning how they see God. He's saying to the most religious guys in the world, you've missed it. It's about something else. And he tells three stories, and this is the third one. It's not long, but it captures something about what people are like and what God is like in a way you'll never see anywhere else. So let's have a look, and it should be on the screen at the same time. There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Jesus begins this story with this fantastic hook to get everyone's attention. He's a great storyteller. This man has two sons, and what would normally happen in that culture is when the man died, the older son would get 2/3 of his estate, and the younger one would get 1/3, which might seem unfair to us, but that's how it was. But the younger son comes to his dad while he's still alive and says, "Okay, I want my share now." And this is basically the most offensive thing you could say to your dad. It's like saying to your dad, "The man that raised you, really, I want my life to be like it would be if you didn't exist, please. I don't want you. I'd rather just have your stuff. I want you to be dead to me so I could spend your money, if that's okay." Why does he say this? Well, somehow this son has got to the place in life where he knows he enjoys his father's stuff more than he enjoys him. Horrible, but at least he's honest. And the crowd listening to this would have been shocked. They'd be standing there shaking their heads. And so what Jesus does from the beginning is he deliberately gets them to be against this younger son. Remember, it's the so-called good people who are listening, the religious rules people. So their instinctive reaction when they hear this is, "Oh, what a terrible son. People like him, they're the problem in this world, aren't they? Selfish people. Oh, terrible." But now imagine you're the dad in the conversation, in the story. What emotions are you going through when your son speaks to you this way? Anger, disappointment, sadness, lots of things. But right from the beginning, the dad does not react in the way that he has a right to. He could just tell his son where to go and that would be appropriate. But what he does is he gives the son exactly what he asks for. The word used here for property was originally the Greek word bios, which means life. Literally, the father divided his life between his sons. And it continues. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I'll set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.'" So the son takes his share and he heads off. He ends up in a distant country. He puts physical distance between himself and his dad, and he ends up in wild living. He's got wine and women and fast cars, and it's all a lot of fun until the day when it isn't. The inheritance runs out. And the distant country, away from his dad, it seems so appealing. I can do what I like. I can make my own decisions, my own rules. Nobody to tell me what to do. And it promised so much, but in the end it delivered so little. Eventually the parties were over, and the people he thought were his friends have disappeared. Who'd have thought? And so the son ends up feeding pigs. For a Jewish man, this is the lowest of the low, the worst job imaginable. He's so desperate, he even wants to eat pig food. But now that he's a man without money, nobody cares enough to give him even that. And then it finally happens. He came to his senses. There's a lot of emotion in this story, but this is a moment of rationality. This is logical. And notice it doesn't begin with regret and, I've upset my dad, that's terrible. It begins with desperation. My dad's servants have loads of food. If I go and say sorry to him, I could get work as a servant, and it's got to be better than the pig feeding, hasn't it? And this is genius from Jesus telling the story. The son has made a number of mistakes, but behind them all, this is very important, is how he views his dad. He has no idea how much his dad loves him. He's been so focused on the possessions and the stuff and the money, he thinks, if I go home, well, okay, maybe I can be on the bottom rung. Maybe I can do that. That's the maximum he expects from his dad. Maybe I can be a servant. He has no idea. Have you ever been in one of those situations where you've done something so bad, you rehearse an apology before you even have to say it? You think through how to word it. And the younger son does exactly that. His apology's pretty good. He says all the right things. He says, I'm not worthy to be your son. Correct. He says, I have sinned against heaven and against you. Great words. But we know the motivation behind this is he's hungry. He's in need. He's sorry because his life isn't very good. And you know what? I'm sure the dad knows this. You can tell when an apology is heartfelt and when it's done for another reason. And I think when the son comes home, his dad knows what's going on. And his response, the dad's response is not based on the quality of the apology. But the son does have the apology ready to go. And then it continues. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. This is just wonderful. While he was still a long way off, his dad saw him. And the only way that could have happened is his dad was looking for him, hoping on the front porch maybe, hoping one day his son was going to come home. And the moment he sees him, he runs, he sprints. Now in that culture, dads didn't run. It was seen as undignified. It was embarrassing. The whole community would have been shocked. The dad doesn't care. And in fact, he goes to his son and hugs him and grabs him before he can even say anything. And that tells us two things. Firstly, his love for his son isn't based on how good quality his apology is. He loves him regardless of how sorry he is. He just wanted him to come home. And secondly, and this is really important, he'd already forgiven him before he came home. Now, if you ever have to forgive anyone, and I'm sure you have, you'll know that it costs something. The worse the offence, the bigger the cost. Not money, but emotionally, it costs something to forgive somebody. To let the other person off, so to speak. The father had already done the hard work before his son came home. The huge emotional cost of forgiveness has already been dealt with in his own soul. And that's why when he sees his son, his dad throws his arms around him and he kisses him. Before he can say anything, it's publicly communicated, this son is restored. And it's only after that the son can squeeze out his rehearsed apology. And all his words are true. He isn't worthy of his dad. And maybe by now, the son feels the weight of his betrayal because he's already been accepted and he still says sorry. But his dad doesn't seem to be interested in the words. And he says, Jesus continues with this, but the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and he's alive again. He was lost and is found. And so they began to celebrate. The dad is so excited to have his son home. And it's like it's the best day of his life. And this is important because if you think about what happened, there's a few different approaches the father could have taken to this whole situation. He could be completely fair. The son could have come home and he could have said, well, okay, well, son, it was your choice, it has to be said. I still love you, but you've made your bed, now you have to lie in it. You're not my son anymore. That's what you've done. And probably nobody would object if that had happened. Secondly, he could be merciful. He could say, well, you've been a really bad boy, son, but because I love you, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you a chance. You can work for me for a few years, and if you play your cards right, maybe over time, possibly you could get brought back into the family for special occasions, but you've got to earn it. It really was very offensive what you did, And if the father had responded that way, everybody would look on and say, well, that's nice of him. That's merciful. It is his son after all. But also, he could be gracious. Now, us Christians like the word grace, but it's often misunderstood. What it means is extravagant, over the top, unwarranted, unearned favour. It's just excessive love and goodness towards someone who not only hasn't earned it, but actively deserves the opposite. It's like if someone owes you loads of money and you don't just write off the debt, you also give them a big cheque. And the father has this massive party. He kills the fattened calf, which basically meant the best meat around, reserved for a special occasion. And that's where it goes further than justice, further than mercy. And the father chooses grace. That's his option. That's the one he goes for. And what the father has done costs far more than the calf. It costs him the price of forgiveness, of taking the emotional pain onto himself and his own reputation. When he brings the younger son back into the family, he makes him an heir again. The family is now worse off, but the younger son is restored to a position where he can lay claim to a third of the inheritance again. This is completely bonkers. It's ridiculous. And it affects everyone. The father will have to take the heat from everyone else in the family, people who are not as gracious as he is. And this is where the story changes gear. You see, for the point we've got to, if the story stopped here, it's a lovely little story about a son who runs away, reforms a little bit, and then comes home to his dad. And if it was a Hollywood film, it would end here with a big tearful reunion. But again, Jesus is the master storyteller, because there's another important character. And it goes like this. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come home, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you killed the fattened calf for him. The older son was in the field. In other words, he's working. He's focused on the family business. He hasn't asked for a share of the inheritance. He hasn't been the wild child. He hasn't wasted the money. He's a good boy. Shouldn't we all be more like him? Well, sometimes you get the impression that the older son represents what Christians are supposed to be like. Prudent, dutiful, very serious, good people. But that's not what Jesus is saying here. The son is outside, he hears music and dancing and eating, and when he finds out what it's all about, he's furious. He's furious because his dad has forgiven his brother. Someone else's forgiveness fills him with rage. He doesn't want grace or even mercy. He wants fairness. He wants justice. And you can understand his point of view. He's been a good boy. His brother hasn't. The little brat should live with the consequences. On the surface, the older son is very well behaved. He does all the right things. But underneath, he's very dark. How he responds tells us how he really sees everything. He thinks that love should be given on the basis of behaviour. It's all very simple. He's been good. His brother hasn't. He's earned his father's love and approval and all the good things, and his brother has not. And you can relate to this, I'm sure, because by and large this is how a lot of the world tends to work. But then in the story, the dad comes out to plead with this older brother. As I said before, dads didn't run in that culture, but even more than that, they did not come and plead with their children. This is a huge concession. They're very different people, but this dad loves both of his sons. He bends over backwards for them. So the dad pleads, but look at how the older son replies. All these years I've been slaving. That word says everything. He hasn't been working for his dad because he loves his dad and he appreciates him and all the great things he gets. He's been slaving. In other words, in his mind, he hasn't been sufficiently rewarded for all the great things that he's doing, all the great stuff he brings. His dad owes him so much more than he's getting. I deserve a great life. I'm not given what I deserve for my goodness. Can you see the arrogance? Can you see how despite outward appearances, despite doing the right thing, despite obeying the rules, being sensible, the older son is absolutely full of pride and a sense of his own superiority. He is the one who looks at his little brother and says, I would never do anything as bad as that. I'm a good person. And look at how he speaks. This son of yours. He can't even bring himself to speak of him as his little brother. If the older brother had known his own heart, he would have realised, I am just as self-centred as my brother is. I've just got different tactics. I've got no right to feel superior to him. But older brother types don't see them this way, and I know this because I happen to be quite a similar character myself. And just like his brother, here's the great irony, he wants the same things. He wants the father's stuff. He doesn't want the father around. And look at that tiny glimpse of what he actually wants. He says, you never even gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. Bearing in mind, the older brother has never left and come back. What is it he wants to celebrate? Very simply, I think, he wants to celebrate himself. And he doesn't want to do that with his dad. He doesn't want him involved. He wants to celebrate with his friends, a party to celebrate himself. So actually, he's very similar to his brother. Think about it. Both of them want the dad's stuff. Neither of them really want the dad. They just have very different ways of getting there. The younger son takes what he can get and runs. The older son plays the long game and thinks, if I slave away, I'll get what I deserve. Dad will owe me lots of nice things. Neither son has any idea how much their dad loves them or what an enormous privilege that love is. They don't have a clue. And the story ends with the father's words. My son, the father said, you're always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. This is how the dad speaks to the older brother. My son, you're always with me. Everything I have is yours. In spite of his attitude, just like with his brother, this dad is willing to give him everything he has. And the story ends with this wonderful dad giving his bitter, unforgiving son this gentle little challenge. I know you don't want me to forgive your brother, but I already have. I'm celebrating unashamedly because he's home. You could join us. I want you there as well. And Jesus ends the story there. Your brother's home, what are you going to do? He leaves the audience hanging. The younger son went off and came home, that's all resolved. But at the end of the story, the older son is still stood outside the house. Will he come back in? Jesus does this very deliberately. Remember, his audience was a group of religious leaders. They're classic older brother types. They're good religious people, they follow the rules. They look down on people who don't. And Jesus is letting them finish the story. He's sort of saying, okay, you religious guys, you're like the older brother. What will you do? How will you respond? Will they come back into the house? Or will they stay out in the field sulking in bitterness at a father who extends forgiveness to those who don't keep all of the rules? So there's the story. But at the beginning I said, this story communicates the Christian message like nothing else. And I wonder if you picked that up as we went through. Let's think about each of the characters. First, the younger son. He doesn't want to be restricted. He doesn't want rules. So he goes off to discover himself. He has a gap year in the Far East or something, and he tries to find himself. And his mindset is, different people, new places, new experiences, that's what I need. But it can't last forever. And a younger brother might think things like this, and maybe not out loud, but I think this is the sort of thing a younger brother would think. Nobody has the right to tell me anything. I decide what's right. I define myself. My identity is what I say it is. I will find happiness by experiencing everything I want to experience. And the big problem in the world is older brother types. Behind all this, what's this person trying to do? When you look at his life, the younger son is trying to find something greater, something that brings his life a joy and a contentment he just feels like he hasn't found. And the way this spiritually plays out in our society is that you stay as irreligious as possible. The church from the outside looks like a gang of older brothers, rules and conformity, so you want to stay as far away from that as possible. Completely understandable. But I'm willing to bet that under the surface, if you're a younger brother type, you know this isn't producing the results you're after. Eventually, the younger son in the story faces a crisis. If you're looking for contentment in travelling around the world, or getting drunk with your mates every week, or sleeping with as many good-looking people as possible, or having amazing holidays, or getting the house of your dreams, whatever, there's so many things. I think you know, whether you want to engage with it or not, that it's not enough. And those aren't all bad things, but you're afraid that it may be that you could try everything, and it still won't satisfy you. It may even be that you've done life for long enough, You're very aware that all of that doesn't work. The younger son went to the distant land because it promised everything, but it didn't deliver. It never does in the end. And then secondly, the older son. He's responsible. He pays his taxes. He budgets sensibly. He's that sort of person. He likes discipline and hard work and all of that. Outwardly, he's a good guy, a good citizen. But his mindset is, if I do the right things, if I behave the right way, I'll get all the nice things I'm entitled to. And the sort of things an older brother might think are things like this. And again, I don't think he would admit them. But there'd be this sort of thing. The world would be better if everyone was more like me in their ethics, their politics, their dress sense, and so on and so on and so on. I live so well that I deserve for good things to happen to me. People should see and acknowledge all the good I bring. I'm glad I'm better than that person over there. And it should be said, as soon as you do that with literally anybody in society, you're being an older brother. And the big problem in society is younger brother types, surely. What's this person looking for? He's waiting for the day when he'll be celebrated. What he wants is recognition. He wants people to acknowledge he's a good person, he's done well, his way is best. But why? Because there is something in us that means we desperately want to be valuable, we want to be worthwhile. When it comes down to it, we want someone, we might not even know who, to say, you're worth it, you've done well, you have value. And so older brother types are often religious. And I don't just mean in terms of Islam, Judaism and so on, but in the sense that older brother types are constantly playing an internal game of trying to justify themselves to God. Even if they say they don't believe in God, they're never happy because they know deep down that they fall short. And so for them, life is a constant comparison contest. Even over small things, older brothers have to have the bigger bank balance, or win the board game, or show they've done more chores, or they've got better behaved kids, or they pray more, they've got a better moral track record, they get the best grades, and so on and so on and so on. And it means every person around them, even if it's someone they love, is a potential rival, someone to do something better than, someone to be more worthy than. And that's why older brotherism leaves you lonely and often annoyed. I'm willing to bet you've experienced this too, because while we're probably each like one of these brothers at different times, we're probably all like both of them in our own way. The most important character in this story, though, is the father, the dad. Now you can probably tell the dad in the story is supposed to represent what God is like with us. And this is really important because you might be someone who thinks that God is probably like the older brother figure in the story. And sometimes Christians do a bad job and we make it sound that way for some reason. And if God was like that, you'd be right to steer clear. But Jesus doesn't describe him that way. This dad is the sort of dad you'd love to get to know. Look at what the dad communicates in the story when he interacts with his sons. These are things that he says, essentially. I'll give you everything you have. I'm waiting for you to come home. I don't care what you've done, good or bad, because I love you regardless. And I'll do whatever I can to be close to you. And this captures the Christian message so well. We all reject the Father in our own ways. We pursue experiences and we seek things in joy in things that are limited and dissatisfying. And we justify ourselves by how good or successful we are in 1,000 different ways. And these things don't work. And yet this dad, God, loves us and will do anything he can to get us. That's what this story is about. It's what Christianity is about. It's the best news in the world. But how on earth could this be true? How could this happen? I mentioned earlier that for the father to embrace his sons, even after how they treat him, would have taken a lot of hard work behind the scenes. We all know forgiving somebody is hard. But for God to embrace us means he had to deal with the huge pain of how we reject him. And he does. Jesus told this story to a bunch of older brother types who were concerned that he liked younger brother types too much. And those were the people that ended up killing him. But what nobody knew was that this was God as a father dealing with all the things that the dad in the story had to deal with, all the betrayal and the hurt and the anger, by placing it on Jesus. Jesus is God himself on earth. It's incredible. He takes it all on. He dies and rises again, so that God says to each and every one of us, I'll give you all you have. I'm waiting for you to come home. I don't care how good or bad you've been, and I've done what is necessary to be close to you. He's done it all. And so all that's left for us to consider, will we run home, even with mixed motives like the younger son, Or will we stand outside in a huff, thinking that we know what's best, like the older son? The dad is waiting with open arms. Now, you might be listening today and you're not a follower of Jesus. You've got 101 questions. If so, that's great. We'd love to hear from you. And we're about to run a course called Alpha, which is a very relaxed place to discuss questions. And this one is entirely online, so you can do it from the comfort of your own home. But the heart of it is this: God is waiting for you with open arms. You might also be listening as someone who didn't have a good time in 2020. You're a follower of Jesus, you're a Christian, but you did not have a good 2020. Without normal life happening, you sort of drifted off. You walked away a bit, younger brother style. And you've got into this mindset where you're out of the house and you're not sure whether you can come back. But the message of this story is, yes, you absolutely can. God is waiting for you with open arms. Or it might be that in the middle of everything, you've forgotten what God's like and you've made it about how hard you try and how good you can be, like the older brother, and now you're exhausted. And being a Christian frankly feels like a drag because you've missed it. God is waiting with open arms. I hope you've had a wonderful 2021. Whether good things or bad things are happening to you, but the good news is your dad is waiting for you with open arms. Let me pray. Father, thank you that in Jesus, the hard work has been done, that any of us can come home, any of us can come back to you, whether we're long-term Christians or we've never thought about it in our lives. Closeness to you is available and is wonderful. Thank you for that. Thank you for this story where Jesus makes it so clear. It's not about being good or doing loads of good things. It's not about how bad we've been. It's about what Jesus has done. Thank you that you are like the Father in this story and even greater. Amen.